Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the fascinating history of Sri Lanka. Now, you might picture Sri Lanka as just a beautiful tropical getaway, but trust me, the reality is so much more compelling. We are looking at a critical 2,500-year-old geopolitical nexus. Because of its sheer geographic placement, this island has literally been at the absolute center of global trade, human migration, and imperial ambition since ancient times. So let's explore exactly how this island's breathtaking past has shaped its incredibly complex present.
For centuries, you see, Sri Lanka wasn't just a piece of land. It was a massive prize. Historical sources literally describe it as a rich island paradise and a commercial cornucopia. And it's easy to see why. Its natural harbors and indigenous treasures, things like cinnamon, elephants, and pearls, inherently attracted, well, everyone. From the earliest Indian Ocean traders to diverse religious missionaries, right up to the massive fleets of European empires, they were all drawn here. Its geography was, quite simply, its destiny.
Okay, let's dive into this. To understand how we got here, we're going to follow a 6-part roadmap. We'll start with the ancient island crossroads, move through 3 waves of colonization, then cover independence and deepening divisions, the decades of civil conflict, a look at its resilient cultural heritage, and finally, modern growth and new challenges.
Part 1. The Ancient Island Crossroads, Strategic Location and Early Civilizations.
So long before the famous Silk Road was fully up and running, Indian Ocean trade routes relying on monsoon winds made this island a mandatory pit stop. We're talking a crucial link between Western India, Arabia, East Africa, and eventually Southeast Asia and China. Naturally, that prime real estate triggered early human settlements. We actually have evidence of the hunter-gatherer Balangota man dating way back, around 30,000 years ago. Fast forward a bit to the 6th century BC, and we see the arrival of the Sinhalese-speaking Proto-Aryan people from India, who started building these vast, highly engineered kingdoms like Anuradhapura. Right around the same time, Tamil-speaking settlers, notably connected to the massive Chola dynasty of southern India, were also establishing roots on the island. And then, by the 3rd century BC, early missionaries brought Theravada Buddhism, which, as you'll see, profoundly shaped the island's cultural and political fabric forever.
Part 2. 3 ways of colonization. European empires arrive. For centuries, these local kingdoms flourished. They built immense water reservoirs and super intricate agricultural systems. But then, the 16th century brought a massive disruption. European empires, totally hungry for dominance over the highly lucrative global spice trade, locked their sights on Sri Lanka's immense strategic value. And they took control in 3 cascading steps. First up, the Portuguese arrived in 1505, slapping down coastal forts, mostly to protect their tight monopoly on cinnamon from Muslim traders. Next, in the mid-17th century, the Dutch rolled in. They pushed the Portuguese out, drastically altered local agriculture, and enforced some seriously strict monopolies and taxation all along the coast. Finally, in 1796, the British arrived on the scene. And by 1815, they actually achieved what the others hadn't: total territorial control over the entire island, completely restructuring the society from the ground up.
The British forced a fundamental economic shift. They completely transformed Sri Lanka from a traditional agrarian economy, one focused on rice, local vegetables, and inland commerce, into a massive colonial plantation economy. Land was seized left and right just to grow export crops like tea and rubber, and this completely altered the local diet and culture. In fact, a really surprising detail from our sources is that the British literally introduced apples and European vegetables like cabbage and broccoli to the hill country. It's wild, but today, these are still referred to locally as upcountry vegetables.
Part 3. Independence and deepening divisions. The seeds of conflict. Following World War II, Sri Lanka gained its independence from Britain in 1948, but the country they left behind was deeply fractured. The colonial strategy of divide and rule, which often favored minority groups for administrative roles to keep the majority in check, left behind these simmering societal tensions that were just about to boil over. A truly pivotal moment in this post-colonial era was the 1956 National Language Act. This specific legislation made Sinhala the sole official language of the country. And this was a huge deal because it directly contradicted earlier ordinances that had explicitly protected Tamil as a national language. Objectively speaking, historians and analysts point to this exact act as the definitive beginning of Sri Lanka's period of modern internal contention.
To really understand the cause and effect here, we have to look at how these structural shifts fueled some incredibly deep resentment. For the Tamil minority, the loss of language parity meant immediate disenfranchisement when it came to state employment and university admissions. Furthermore, the state began expropriating Tamil medium schools and pushing forward state-sponsored colonization schemes. These schemes actually moved Sinhalese populations into historically Tamil majority areas in the east, which drastically altered the local demographics. These compounding grievances ultimately snowballed, leading directly to the formation of the Tamil United Liberation Front in 1976.
Part 4. Decades of Civil Conflict, the Tragedy of War. The failure of successive political administrations to address those structural grievances through peaceful mechanisms unfortunately led to a tragic escalation. The political impasse gave way to violent insurrection, most notably with the emergence of the Tamil Tigers, an armed group seeking an independent state in the north and east. In 1983, the Black July riots resulted in the tragic massacres of Tamils and officially marked the start of full-scale war. By 1987, the conflict had grown so incredibly complex that it triggered a controversial and ultimately failed intervention by the Indian peacekeeping force. After years and years of brutal fighting, a Norwegian-brokered ceasefire was signed in 2002. It offered a brief respite, but it eventually collapsed. Finally, in May 2009, the Sri Lankan government militarily defeated the Tamil Tigers, bringing the nearly 30-year civil war to a close.
Now, while that 2009 military victory ended the act of fighting, the story definitely didn't end there. The post-war period kicked off massive, heavily concentrated reconstruction efforts up in the north and east. But uniquely, this was largely managed under the Ministry of Defense and Urban Development, leading to what researchers specifically call a militarized post-war reconstruction. This particular approach, combined with lingering questions over accountability during the war's final stages, continues to spark intense international debate regarding transitional justice even today.
Part 5. A Resilient Cultural Heritage, Enduring Traditions.
Okay, let's shift gears for a second, because despite centuries of colonization and conflict, an astonishing ancient cultural bedrock has endured underneath all that political strife, maintaining an incredibly unique identity. Now, what's really interesting about this is the concept of competitive sharing. While modern politics often tries to draw sharp, distinct lines between Sinhala Buddhists and Tamil Hindus, the actual religious practice on the ground is wonderfully hybridized. Both religions share ancient sacred sites located right along those old trade routes. There is a deep, ongoing integration of Hindu deities into Buddhist practices and vice versa. It's this fascinating socio-historical phenomenon where, despite constitutional differences, the everyday spiritual lives of the people actually deeply overlap.
And the physical manifestations of this heritage? They are simply mind-blowing. Sri Lanka currently boasts 8 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. We are talking about ancient cities with unbelievably elaborate irrigation systems, intricately carved cave temples filled from floor to ceiling with vibrant murals, and the giant massive stupas of Anuradhapura. These stupas are absolute architectural marvels, built with a sheer grandeur and precision that easily rival the Egyptian pyramids. It just goes to show exactly why this island's ancient heritage is of such immense global importance.
Part 6. Modern Growth and New Challenges. The Economic Reality.
Moving into the modern day, we really need to examine the economic reality of the post-war era. You see, the end of the conflict in 2009 brought this sudden, massive economic boom as the country finally opened up. Just consider this number, 14.3%. That was the explosive industrial value-added growth rate in those immediate post-war years. Manufacturing was expanding rapidly, and labor productivity absolutely surged. It was a moment of immense optimism for a country completely desperate for peace and prosperity. But unfortunately, that initial optimism was short-lived. While economic growth was riding high above 8% in 2011 and 2012, it declined steadily to below 5% from 2013 onwards. So why the sudden drop? Well, the sources point clearly to heavy, extensive foreign borrowing that was used to finance massive infrastructure projects. When you combine that mountain of debt with mounting losses from state-owned enterprises and constrained government revenue, the macroeconomic stability required to actually sustain that initial post-war growth just rapidly eroded. Which leaves us here. Today, Sri Lanka remains exactly where it has always been, a strategic jewel in the Indian Ocean, constantly balancing the interests of global superpowers. It has survived ancient invasions, 3 global empires, and a totally devastating civil war. Yet, it retains a culture of profound depth and resilience. So, the question we want to leave you with today is this. As the island continues to sit at the absolute center of modern geopolitical interests, how will its breathtaking, turbulent past ultimately shape its future? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer.